In October of 2004, Fullmetal Alchemist, the 2003 anime series, ended its run. It was left on an open note that someday the Elric brothers would see each other again. Of course, this was not the ending of that story. This film right here is the ending of the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series. Howdy, Fullmetal Cowboys, straight shooting a review of an anime film that continues and concludes an anime phenomenon. It did not take long for Bones to make a follow-up to the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series after its final episode aired. Seiji Mizushima, who directed the series prior, returns to direct the feature-length conclusion of the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series. If there is anything I see worth noting, it would be that the script was around 100 pages in its first draft, and was cut down by 1/3. Had the script been intact for the most part, the film would have likely ended up being 3 hours long. It would have been nice if the script had more fine-tuning before transmuting this theatrical follow-up. More on that later. But first, the animation. It looks visually consistent with the series that preceded it, with the obvious and typical improvement of having higher production values, as it is a theatrical production, which tends to have better animation than an anime production aimed for a television broadcast. One such example is a fight scene midway in the film. I also like the attention to detail with the color palette between our world and the world that the Elric brothers are from. Even though some of this lack of vibrant colors would later be presented in Ed and Al's world much later in the film. Still, I like the contrast with the film's color palette for the most part. It greatly shows the differences between Ed and Al's world and ours. While the animation is great as a feature-length production, there is one thing I don't like about the visual presentation of Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa: its use of 3D animation. Fortunately, it is not heavily done throughout the film's runtime. It's just that when it's present, it's not really that impressive to look at. This is just a kink in the automail compared to the issues I have with this transmutation attempt. Michiru Oshima, who had provided music for the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series, continued to provide the score for Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa, and it is mostly on par with her excellent score in the series that came before it. There are some unique musical directions exclusive to the Conqueror of Shamballa, but it is only noticeable in a few places. The orchestral pieces are great as always, like before. The unique songs that do sound different than what is typically heard do complement the different setting that Edward is in. Elric provides both the opening credits theme and the ending credits theme. I suppose it's nice that they pitched in to do more songs for the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series, especially after the second opening theme, Ready Steady Go, was such a damn good opener. The voice acting in the original Japanese version is on par with the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series. Romy Park and Rie Kugimiya remain as standouts, as well as the other cast members I previously mentioned in my review of the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series. However, like the series prior, I prefer the English dub, although both versions are perfectly watchable. The standouts of the dub are, of course, Vic Mignogna as Edward Elric, as well as Aaron Dismuke in his canonical send-off with his role as Alphonse Heydrich, as Aaron Dismuke went through puberty right after voicing Alphonse in Fullmetal Alchemist, the Conqueror of Shamballa. This was not the last we would hear of Aaron Dismuke in Fullmetal Alchemist in regards to the anime side of the franchise. Aaron Dismuke reprised his role as Alphonse Heydrich one last time in the Fullmetal Alchemist Premium OVA Collection, which was released after the Conqueror of Shamballa. There is a reason why I stated that this was the last canonical performance by Aaron Dismuke, because if we're talking strictly canon here, this is the last major performance from Aaron Dismuke as Alphonse Heydrich, as the Premium OVA Collection can be seen as just supplemental material to the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series. And years later, he would return to the Fullmetal Alchemist franchise and the anime side, and that I'll talk about for a later video. While the dub of Fullmetal Alchemist The Conqueror of Shamballa is a very good production once upon a time from Funimation, it does have one glaring flaw. That being the lack of a German accent throughout the dub of Fullmetal Alchemist The Conqueror of Shamballa. You see, there was a German accent present in the final episode of Fullmetal Alchemist. So why is it missing in the dub of Fullmetal Alchemist The Conqueror of Shamballa?
We come from an island long forgotten by the modern world. Communicating with the ancients will teach us what we've lost and help us fulfill our destiny. He said he was Edward Elric.
And what does that mean?
It means that he's Hohenheim's true son. To think another person has safely passed through the gate.
But at least the dub is a slight improvement from the dub in the series, especially with line delivery. Now I would like to talk about the one ingredient that made Fullmetal Alchemist stand out: the characters. A good number of them did make a long-standing impression, even if the story deviated from the source material. The Elric brothers are accounted for because, of course they would. They are the focal point in the cast of characters. Other fan favorites are nice to see in Fullmetal Alchemist The Conqueror of Shamballa. The execution, however, is hit and miss. Seeing Mustang again was great, but we see him sulking after the events of the final episode, even though he signed off then on an optimistic note. Izumi Curtis sadly passed away in between the series and this film. Considering her condition, I can see this being a logical character writing choice. After all, there wasn't much purpose to Izumi Curtis as a character by the time that the series ended. As for the Homunculi, those that remain are envy, wrath, and gluttony. I suppose it's nice that the Conqueror of Shamballa at least gave the Homunculi closure, so this is not necessarily a bad thing to see them appear in this film as well. We do get to see some prominent dogs of the military, such as Riza Hawkeye and Alex Louise Armstrong, even if their screen time is not at large. I suppose it was nice seeing a real-world version of Mace Hughes. On that note, there are some prominent characters from our world. First, there's Noah, who has greater significance in the film's plot, as she is established early on, and she bears some resemblance to Rose. And she too was presented early in the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series. If you ask me, Noah is not that interesting of a character due to the main issue I have with this film as a whole, which I will get to very soon. There are only a few details about Noah that I find to be noteworthy throughout Fullmetal Alchemist The Conqueror of Shamballa. Noah is a gypsy, and her identity is discriminated upon by many people in Berlin, as depicted in this film. And also, she has the ability to see into people just by simply touching them. That's about it. Another character I did not find that interesting was Alphonse Heydrich, who was fine at first, but the only things worth noting about him is his occupation in building rockets and his illness. He could have had more screen time for me to care more for him as a character, but by far the most boring character exclusive to the Conqueror of Shamballa is Dietland Eckhart, who is based loosely on Dietland Eckhart. A historical figure that ended up getting gender bent for this story. And this film came out 10 years before a certain musical came around that had race-bent historical figures, which were the complete opposite of boring.
The time for our passage into Shamballa draws near, Professor.
I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot.
To Shamballa!
So what did I miss? What did I miss?
On the day they make their move, we'll open the path to Shamballa.
Click boom!
This power, the magic I've learned, now it's real.
Sit down, John, you fat mother!
Since I am on the note on historical figures, there is one character based on an actual person worth addressing, and that's Fritz Lang, who is a film director most famous for his German expressionist works in cinema, and his best-known works are films such as Metropolis, M, and the film that is actually mentioned in Fullmetal Alchemist, The Conqueror of Shamballa, Dr. Mabusa the Gambler. Of all the characters based on actual people, Fritz Lang was perhaps the standout real character, since you do get a more accurate depiction of a real-life figure compared to the other characters in Fullmetal Alchemist, The Conqueror of Shamballa. The last character I can think of that I could talk about is Winry Rockbell. She shows up from time to time and is quite convenient for a certain pipsqueak's maintenance. I like Winry. As I said in my review of the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series, I was disappointed that she got sidelined later on in the series. The last thing I had any interest in Winry as a character was when she found out that Colonel Mustang killed her parents during the war due to military orders. That and Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood,
that's a story for another time. Speaking of story,
the first third of Fullmetal Alchemist, The Conqueror of Shamballa, is spent with Edward Elric in our world. It is nice that this film does expand on a concept that the last few episodes of the series did introduce, but it would have been great if this first third balanced Ed's scenes with the dogs of the military, Winry, and Alphonse. Another thing that was introduced in the conclusion of the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series is the Thule Society, who were briefly introduced in the final episode of Fullmetal Alchemist, and they play a larger role in Fullmetal Alchemist, The Conqueror of Shamballa. The Thule Society was an occultist and Volkisch group from Germany that was founded after World War I, and was noted for sponsoring the German Workers' Party, which eventually was reorganized as the National Socialist Germans Workers' Party by Adolf Hitler. And of course, that party was also known as the Nazi Party.
about Hitler, he does get mentioned a couple of times and does get a few brief appearances throughout Fullmetal Alchemist, The Conqueror of Shamballa. He does not have a single line of dialogue.
Nine, 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 nine.
There is a scene where Edward and Fritz Lang have a chat together. At one point, Fritz Lang discusses with Ed about parallel worlds, which adds to why I don't care for such a concept that was sprung at the end stages of the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series. Somewhere around this point of the film, the Elric brothers reunite, although temporary, as Alphonse tells Edward that there might be a way to get Edward back home.
It was at this point in the film that I became increasingly disappointed with Fullmetal Alchemist the Conqueror of Shamballa. As I stated in my review of the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series, I did not really care for the concept of a parallel world being thrown in the story, largely because of how it was thrown in within the last 3 episodes of this series. And this conversation between Edward Elric and Fritz Lang talking about parallel worlds comes off as an excuse to tie in the parallel world concept, despite that it was thrown very late in the story. And I just didn't really care for such a concept at that point. It just seemed like a last-minute surprise that wasn't explored that much. But at the very least, Fullmetal Alchemist the Conqueror of Shamballa did have one thing that did stand out: the action sequence between Wrath and Gluttony.
It is easily a visual highlight throughout the entire film, with the presentation, the gravity behind the sequence, and the outcome. It also gave a few homunculi a semblance of a send-off, instead of giving them ambiguous closure. I cannot say the same for Hohenheim, who only shows up a few times briefly in the film, and he sacrifices himself and takes Envy with him. Considering he showed up in the last quarter of the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series and barely gets screen time in this film, really shows that Hohenheim got the short end in terms of adapting from Hiromu Arakawa's manga of the same name. That and Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood.
I shall wait until the promised day.
I do not like Hohenheim's exit at all. At least he gives Edward the chance to return back home, but Eckhart invades Edward's homeworld moments after. The Elric brothers reunite at last, and they work together alongside Mustang to stop Eckhart from destroying Ed and Al's world, as she fears their world.
Boring!
I stopped being invested in the plot at this point, and I do think that the climax only works in a fan service level, which is not necessarily a bad thing in this film's case, considering it's connected to the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series. And it is nice to see Mustang back to his old self, being the cool flame alchemist and all that, but it does make his sulky attitude at the beginning of the film to not click very well in my eyes looking back at it.
In typical shonen fashion, there is a final fight featuring Edward Elric and Dietland Eckhart. And just as Eckhart sees victory in her sight, her suits of armor turn on her thanks to Alphonse.
Well, no shit.
Which comes as no surprise considering that the film had already shown that Alphonse Elric is perfectly capable of turning suits of armor to his advantage, making the surprise factor of this very scene very predictable. Edward decides to go back to the real world to destroy the gate from the other side, so that it would stop his world from being invaded ever again, at the cost of never returning back home. Alphonse protests, but he ends up sneaking on board so that he can be with Edward. Also, Eckhart is back in the real world in a mutated form, only to get shot by Hughes. The Elric brothers together destroy the gate off-screen, and everyone lives happily ever after, thus ending the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series.
Did you get all that? Because I covered a good amount of ground while trying to be concise at the same time to make this review flow as good as I possibly could make it flow. What Fullmetal Alchemist, the Conqueror of Shamballa needed was a better flow, because the pacing in this film is awful.
The pacing of Fullmetal Alchemist, The Conqueror of Shamballa is a constant detriment from beginning to end. Characters that reside in our world have more considerable screen time than the characters we know and love, who were already more interesting than the film-exclusive characters. As I said, that first third is spent greatly on the real world, and this first third could have balanced out the time spent on both worlds. The film does have a steady pace in its second third, but once we start getting to the finish line, the pacing runs fast, which leaves the film's pacing a transmuted clusterfuck.
Now that I've addressed my major criticisms, one might ask, why do I own Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa after all this time? It's simple. It is canon with the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series. And these two together form a complete series. After all, Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa did give the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series a semblance of closure. Without this, there really isn't much closure to this series.
At the end of the day, Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa left me disappointed with the conclusion of the 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist anime series, which to this day is still worth experiencing just to see why it became such a phenomenon. Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa just happens to be the one thing in this series I am not as fond about. Despite what I think of Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa at the end of the day, I have come to a very rare conclusion when it comes to my experiences with anime. Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa is the best Fullmetal Alchemist film to date. I may not think it is a good film, but if we are strictly talking about theatrical releases of Fullmetal Alchemist, The Conqueror of Shamballa is the best looking Fullmetal Alchemist film. It is connected to a piece of the franchise, and not just some standalone film like Fullmetal Alchemist: The Sacred Starlet Milos. And it's also not just some unnecessary cash grab like the live-action Fullmetal Alchemist film. I suppose the theory of equivalent exchange is applicable to Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa after all. It really is the best Fullmetal Alchemist film out there, but a far better ending came 5 years after the release of Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa.
And now my review of Fullmetal Alchemist: The Conqueror of Shamballa can now drift off into the sunset. And I am almost done talking about the first era of Fullmetal Alchemist in the anime sphere of that franchise. There is the aforementioned Premium OVA collection, which I will be covering that next. So that should be coming out soon. Now, once I'm done with that, there is also the second era of Fullmetal Alchemist in the anime sphere of the franchise. And that, of course, means eventually I'll be talking about Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. And I'm very much looking forward to talking about that when I get around to talking about Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. And I want to make sure that review in particular is done in the best way I possibly can make it. And that promised day will come soon. But I got some other reviews I want to work on as well beforehand. But I assure you, it won't be a long wait. I have a very specific day I want to release my review of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. And I think that day in particular would be extremely fitting. But until that promised day comes, I'll be reloading for my next review. So until then, see you later.